Hey class. In this video, I'm going to be talking about the basics of editing audio. So you'll need to download Audacity to follow along with this. I talked about that a little bit in the intro video, but you can also find a download link, class notes. I'm just going to go over some recording and editing tools and kind of the basic interface and setup. If you've used an audio editor before, a lot of this will, I think, feel very basic. But we're going to kind of assume that there are people who have no familiarity with these tools at this point. So I'm just going to go through all the basics of the interface and just the stuff that we need to work on this project. So I'm going to go into the small view for a second, and let's take a look at the Audacity interface. So we actually talked about this briefly in the first video, but the audio setup button here in the middle is something that you may want to check out when you first get started to make sure that you can hear things through your headphones or speakers, whatever you're using. That's the playback device. So you'll want to make sure that it's connected to your headphones or it's playing out of your speakers or whatever you've got working. And then you also want to check the recording device if you're recording directly into your computer. If you're recording on your phone and then importing it to the computer, you won't need to worry about that. Other than that, you should be good. If you have any issues, if something's not working correctly, let me know and we can troubleshoot in office hours. So I'm gonna record a little audio just like I did last time. I'll record a little goofy podcast intro. You don't have to do a podcast. Keep that in mind. This is just for the demo. So I'm just gonna record. I've got my microphone connected, and I'm just gonna record a little bit, and then we'll go over how to edit it. So I'm gonna do my podcast intro again. Hello, welcome to the MMP 100 podcast. Today we are talking about audio. Okay, I'm gonna hit stop. So now we've got some audio to look at. If I hit record again, it'll start a new track. So you might want to make multiple tracks, and you'll see that you can do that. It'll add tracks, and we can move stuff around to different places. So we'll go over that in a moment. But for now, let's just go over the basic playback tools, which are these big buttons up in the top left corner. So you can pause, you can play, you can fast forward or rewind, and then you can record and you can loop a section. So pretty typical, pretty straightforward if you've ever used an editor. One thing that you'll notice is if you're playing back, you can't really use any of the other tools. It kind of won't let you do edits or other things like that while you're doing playback. So when we play back, we can listen to a section. If we want to make edits and stuff, we have to stop the playback. So when I hit play, hello, welcome to the, we'll hear some different audio stuff. If I hit play and I click around, MMP, notice nothing happens. But if I click around on the timeline normally and then hit play, it'll change where it plays from. Today, we can also make a selection. So if I want to hear one part, if I want to isolate one part, I can kind of select that part of the audio using the mouse, and then when I play it back, it's only going to play back that part of the audio. Hello, hello, and we can even loop that if we want to hear it. Hello, hello. So that's useful if you're doing like a really specific edit on part of the audio and you want to hear it a bunch of times to get the right edit. So let's rewind, and if we want to clear this. Hello. We want to clear this loop, just toggle the loop off, and hello. Now we can, just listen to the whole thing. So those are the playback tools. The one thing you have to be kind of careful about is there's some stuff like if I play to the end here, and I hit play again, it's just still at the end. So if you want to go back to the beginning, sometimes you have to hit the rewind button. If you hover over the buttons, you'll also see the keyboard keys that go along with it. So if I hit play, that'll play. Hello. If I hit it again, that'll stop. If I hit end, if you have end on your keyboard, if you have a big keyboard with lots of buttons. You might have a home and end where you can rewind. Record is probably R. So if I hit R, it'll start recording. So those are our basic playback tools. The next little section up here in the interface are sort of the editing tools. So the default tool is the selection tool. That's the F1 tool. This is a default because most of the time when we're editing in Audacity, we're taking out little parts and either adding effects or cutting them. So kind of like I did in the previous video, if we want to make a little edit, if I play the beginning of the audio, and I want to remove this little section where I kind of am making a little noise, I can select it using the selection tool, and then I can hit delete or Control X or backspace. All of those things will remove that section of the audio. I'll go over a little bit more of some basic edits in a bit, but that's kind of like the main thing that we're going to be doing is selecting parts of our audio to either remove them or add effects or change the volume or do different things like that. So that's kind of the default tool. The next tool is the envelope tool. I'm going to skip this for now. I'm going to talk about this in the next video or in actually next week in another video. But this basically lets you change the volume over time. So we'll go over that more in a little bit. The draw tool lets you actually like draw on the audio. Probably not going to need this. This is for a little bit more advanced stuff. And then this multi-tool here basically tries to guess what you're planning to use. I don't really recommend using this one unless you're kind of like very familiar with the audio. But you can see if I turn this multi-tool on, the cursor style kind of changes depending on where we are on the track. So for at least for these first couple lessons, you're going to want to just stick with the default selection tool. All right, so let's look at this next section. These are the zoom buttons and undo and redo and our silence and trim audio section. So these are really useful for editing specific parts of your audio. If I zoom, it's just going to zoom in to wherever the cursor is. So if I have the cursor right here and I click zoom, it's going to zoom with that in the middle. So that's really useful if I want to edit like a specific part of my audio, like this chunk right here. I can highlight it and then I can zoom in, and I can zoom in a lot. It doesn't show actually how far I've zoomed in, but we looked at this in the previous video. You can go down all the way to just like the sample level where you can see the individual samples of the audio. And then of course zoom out. And there's key commands for this as well, Control 1 and 3, so you can zoom in and out that way. This guy here is fit selection to width, so if I click that button or do Control E, it's going to fit this in whatever the selection is to the width of the window. So that's just a quick way to zoom in. And then this one over here fits the whole project to the width. So this one is one of the ones I use the most. That's Control F. You might go Control E, zoom in, make some edits, and then Control F to zoom out and see the whole project. This guy is the zoom toggle. It kind of toggles the way that the zoom works. I don't really use that one a lot. Undo and redo, I usually just use Control Z and Control Y. I don't actually use the buttons. So if I make an edit and I want to undo, I just hit Control Z or Command Z on the Mac. And then we've got this guy is silence audio. So if I have a section, if I want to have some silence at the beginning of the audio, but I don't want to hear that sound, I can just click that and it just silences the audio. Depending on what you're working on, that may or may not be very useful. It may sound weird if there's a lot of background noise. Let's listen to that. Hello. Yeah, so there's a lot of background noise there. So you can kind of hear it go silent and then come back. Not super useful in this case, but if you're working with audio that's a little cleaner, then it might be useful. So I'm going to undo that. Oh, I haven't saved this project yet. Let's talk about that a little bit later. All right, so we already talked about the audio setup. Over here are your monitors. There's a monitor for the mic and for the playback. And without going into a ton of detail about how these things work, if I play back this audio, let's look at the playback in the audio for a second. Hello, welcome to the MMP 100 podcast. Today, we are talking about audio. Okay, so you can see that most of the time it's in this green zone. And the green zone is basically anything. 0 is like as loud as we can possibly be in the decibel scale. And then negative infinity is as quiet as we can be. So anything in the green zone that's like -18, -24, that means it's a good level of audio. We don't want it to be super quiet, but we want it to be kind of in this green zone. When it gets yellow, that means it's starting to get close to too loud. And then when it's red, red means it's too loud. What that means is it's louder. The recording is louder than what the computer or the microphone or whatever can handle. And so that's when you get clipping and distortion and your audio starts to sound bad because what you're trying to record or what you're trying to play is too loud for the device. So if you see a lot of red up there, you may want to, redo the recording. You can tell that this audio is pretty decent because it doesn't go up too high. So when your waveform is like peaking a lot, that means it's like flat at the top because it's getting cut off. That means it's probably going to be distorted. If I turn my microphone, see if I can, yeah, so my microphone right now, the recording level is 66. So just as an example, let's look at a waveform when I record at all the way up to 100%. And I'm gonna get closer to the mic so we can see that peaking. Don't do this, this is just an example. Okay, this is an example of me peaking the audio. Okay, so you probably saw there was a lot of red in the playback. My track is over here now, so if I want to look at this separately, I can make a new track. So I'm going to do track, add a new mono track, and I'm just going to drag this audio down. Oh, this is a stereo track. Whoops. Okay, let's make a new stereo track, and I'll drag this guy down here. And so now we can just look at this audio by itself. And so I'm going to zoom in a little bit. And so notice the waveform is going much higher and then it's getting cut off at the top. So that's when it's peaking, that's when it's going to be distorted. If we play this back, it's probably not going to sound very good. Okay, this is an example of me peaking the audio. It's not so bad, it could be worse, but we do want to avoid that. So that's why normally we record at a slightly lower volume. 66 is good, you could do 70, 75. You can kind of test it and see how it sounds and make sure that it's not peaking when you're recording. So let's get rid of that audio and go over a couple more things. So that's monitoring. We have some other buttons over here on the track itself. So let's take a look at what those do. So there's mute. This does what it sounds like. If I mute this track and play it, we won't hear anything. Once you have multiple tracks and you're mixing, you may want to mute certain things and then bring them back. Solo will just play this track by itself. So if I have a ton of tracks and I want to hear one track by itself to do an edit, I can click the solo button and I'll hear just that track. Right now we don't have that, so we'll ignore that. This little plus minus is our volume. So if I increase the volume, let's play this section. So if it's in the middle, that means it's just playing back at wherever it was recorded. Hello. If I increase, it's going to be louder. Hello. You can see that was peaking a lot. That was not what we want to do. If I decrease, it's going to get very quiet, maybe silent, almost silent. And so this is for the entire track. So we might not use this very often, but if the entire track is too loud and we want to bring it down in the mix, we can do that. I don't really recommend going up unless you really need to. When you're mixing, normally you want to take volume away from something that's too loud rather than adding volume to something that's too quiet. But we'll talk a little bit more about that with our mixing and layering that we'll do next week. Then we have the pan. So if I move this all the way to the left, we'll hear it just in the left speaker. If I go all the way to the right, we'll hear it just in the right speaker. And so you can pan stuff, and you can pan a little bit. Sometimes you probably won't do that so much in this type of project, but it might be useful if you wanted to make it sound like something is coming from across the room or from a different position. Then panning is useful for doing that. There's also effects here. We're not going to go over those right now, but we'll talk about them later. And then of course you can name the track. So I could call this like, voice You can look at the spectrogram. You can change the color of the wave if you want, change the format or the rate. Most likely you won't be doing those things. And then you can also collapse the track using this little arrow button. All right, so let's go over some basic editing. So if I'm editing my audio and I have this like big section that I want to take out, hello, and just start right at this hello, what I can do is just select that section, and then I can just hit delete on the keyboard, and that'll just remove the section. That's usually what I do. You can also go to edit, and you can see there's different types of remove. So there's this remove special. So you can cut and leave a gap. That'll do what it says. It cuts out that audio, but it leaves that gap. So if you're mixing stuff together, you might want to have a gap before something comes in. We can play that back. So we hear that. Welcome to the gap before we hear our playback. We can also do we can do cut and leave gap, delete and leave gap, silence audio, or trim audio. So that'll trim. If I do trim, it'll take off the rest of the audio. Another thing I can do is just split the track. So let's say I want to make an edit here. Hello. And I have these two sections. Podcast today. So let's say I wanted to do something different with this section than this section. So let's say I want to cut this, but I don't, I want to be able to move it around and do other stuff. So let's say I'm just going to trim this part or cut this part. Podcast today. Oops. Okay, we need that. Today. Okay. Let's let's zoom in a little bit here. Today. Okay, so this is where I start talking. I'm going to cut that. So if I just want to leave a little gap there, instead of doing a cut, I can select this here, and I can go to edit. Where is this? Split. So edit audio clips split, or you can do Control I. So that makes a little split, and then if I go up here to the title of the audio track, I can kind of move it around. You can tell I don't really do that very often because it took me a minute to find it, but if you want to do a split, you can do that, and then we can move this over. But again, with all the background noise, this is just going to sound weird. Today. So for now, we'll leave that alone. In the future, maybe we'll use that once we've got some other sound effects and filters to make things sound a little bit better. So let's listen to this. About audio. Okay, so we'll probably cut off the end, but there's some gaps where I'm leaving these long pauses. Today we are talking. So I might want to kind of zoom in here and take some of this out. I can just delete that. Today we are talking about audio. Another little gap here that I can take this out. Audio. About audio. Okay, that was a little too much. About audio. So one thing when you're recording, if you're recording your own voice, it's a lot easier to edit out gaps where you're not talking than it is to separate words where you are talking. So for example, about audio. Here I have talking about. Okay, so let's look at this section. So when I had that big gap between about and audio, it's easy to bring them closer together. But here, talking about audio. Let's say it sounds fine, but let's say I kind of, slurred one word into the other or something like that. It's really hard to edit those apart. So let's say I wanted to move apart talking and about for some reason. Talking about. It's going to be almost impossible to do this. So if I do a split here and I move this over, talking about. So you can tell it doesn't sound normal. Because the way I talk, one syllable kind of leads into the next unless I purposely leave gaps. So when you're recording, you may want to speak a little bit more slowly than you're used to and leave gaps in the audio. It may sound, you don't want to do it too much because it'll start to sound sort of robotic and stilted. But it makes it easier to edit if you talk a little bit more slowly and, fully say words and then, pause and whatever. That's just a little tip. It doesn't really matter that much. Let's redo this edit. But you may want to take a few takes and figure out what works best for you. All right, so those are some really basic edits. We're gonna, I already showed how to add a track, but let's do it one more time. So if I wanted to add a track to start mixing, I would go to add new. And there's two types of tracks. There's mono and stereo. Mono is just one signal. Stereo is two signals for right and left. We hear things in stereo, which is why we record things in stereo. So there can be a slight difference between your right and left ear. But when you're recording or listening to stuff, if you have it in mono, that's going to be fine as well. So if your sound is in stereo, you need a stereo track to edit it. If your sound is in mono, you can edit it with either mono or stereo, but in stereo obviously it's just going to be on one side or the other. You can also split a track into mono if you want to do that. So you can split stereo to mono, or you can make a mono track into a stereo track. There's lots of different ways you can do it, but let's say we want to add a stereo track and we want to generate some background noise. Maybe we took out some talking and we want to mask over that there's no noise there. I could go to generate and noise. And let's do some white noise and just do like 10 seconds. I'll move this over here. That's way too loud. Let's actually redo that. I'm gonna go to generate noise and we're just gonna do 0.1 amplitude. Okay, and so now we're gonna have a little bit of background noise. Hello, well, that's too much. Let's turn the volume way down. So if we're, want it to sound like a radio signal or something like that, we can add a little noise in the background. Hello, welcome to the MMP 100 podcast. Today we are talking, and we can start to kind of like mix and edit our tracks together. So we'll talk about that more in a future video, layering and mixing and stuff like that. So yeah, last thing to cover is exporting. So when we save this file, let's say that, we're going to keep working on this later, but we like where we're at right now. I'm going to trim this extra noise and we want to save this. So when I hit Control S, this save things comes up. You can save it to the cloud if you want. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to save it to my computer. And I'm going to say, you can say, remember my choice and don't show me again. I think it's better probably for this class to save to your computer. If you're really comfortable with digital files and stuff like that, feel free to do whatever. But for this class, I recommend saving to the computer. And so we're just going to make a new folder for this project. And so just like in Photoshop where we had a PSD, in Audacity, our edit file is called an AUP. So that's just the Audacity project file. So I'm going to go to my my OneDrive. This is where I keep stuff for class. I'm gonna go to in class and go to spring 2025, and here's MMP 100. You can see our image project folder. I'm gonna make a new folder here, so I'm just gonna click this new folder button, and I'm gonna call this audio. And then I'm gonna open this up, and I'm just gonna call this audio intro and save. Okay, so if I open up that folder in my file explorer or my finder, you can see there's this AUP3 file. There's a couple of files that are kind of backup files that are open while I'm using it. They'll actually, I think they'll disappear once I close the program. But you can see that Audacity file. If you have Audacity installed already, it might find the icon. Mine hasn't found that icon yet, but we can look at a way to get that to appear in a moment. But you can see the file here. It's 25 kilobytes, so it's not very big, but I didn't really record that much audio. And the audio that I recorded is kind of like built into the file. So we've got our project file, But just like our PSD, I can't publish this anywhere. I can't text it to somebody. I can't email it to somebody. Well, I could, but they wouldn't be able to hear it. And so if I want to send somebody something that they can actually hear, I need an exported file. So let's look at a couple different exported audio files. So if we go back to Audacity and I go to File and Export Audio, I'm going to export to the computer. And it's going to give me some options here. So first I'm going to choose the folder that I was just in. So let's find that again. So I'm going to go to In Class, P100, Audio, and I'm going to save it here. So it gives me some options for the format. So the first option is WAV. WAV is sort of the biggest, most high quality, high fidelity format. So WAV format basically saves all of the data and it compresses it a little bit to try to make it more efficient, but it doesn't take out any of the frequencies or any of the audio data. It just saves all of the data together. And so if I export this WAV file, we're going to see it here. It's 1.2 kilobytes. So it's a very short file. It's not very large, but it's we'll see that other formats are going to be smaller. So WAV is a good format for saving like a high quality copy of the file that you might want to use when you're editing a video or making sounds for a video game or doing something where you want the audio to sound really good. The other most popular format or most used format probably is MP3. MP3 is a file format that became popular a long time ago for music because it takes, what MP3 does is it basically looks at the audio and it takes out a lot of the frequencies that we probably won't really hear or we won't notice if they're gone. So a lot of the lower frequencies, a lot of the higher frequencies, and it keeps the frequencies in our normal sort of hearing range. So it gets rid of a lot of the information of the file, and that makes the file a lot smaller. But if you play it out really loud over speakers or in a movie theater, you might start to hear that some of the frequencies are missing. So if we export our MP3, we're going to see, let's get my folder. So the MP3 is 161 kilobytes. So it's like a fifth of the size. It's less than a fifth of the size of the WAV file. So it's a lot smaller. So that means it's easier to share on the internet. It's easier to text to somebody or post online. And it's going to sound, to most people, it's going to sound pretty much the same. If you were listening to it over really nice speakers or you have really good hearing, you might be able to hear the differences, but most people won't notice. MP3s became really popular in the early days of the internet because it was an easy way to share a lot, like a whole album of music that could be downloaded relatively quickly versus like high quality WAV files take a really long time to download. So most of what we'll do is probably MP3s since we're going to post them on the blog. But I just want to talk about all the differences. There's a few other formats on here. Ogg Vorbis is kind of a newer standard that is really good at compression, but also has really good sound quality. So, people think I think a lot of people would say Ogg is a better quality than MP3 and they prefer that. But it hasn't quite gotten as popular as MP3s in general. FLAC files are also what's called lossless files like waves. They don't lose any data. So that's a nice, good, high quality audio format. There's a bunch of other ones here. We don't have to go into all of them, but those are some of kind of the basics. So that's it for this video. We've saved our project and we've exported some copies. And so I'm going to go over adding some other audio sources in the next video. And then I'll go over posting on the blog for this week as well in the next video.